It's improved operations in a few ways. First of all, we've been able to transition a lot of our networks from circuits that are maybe 1.5 megabytes, 45 megabytes, TDM based, to Ethernet at 100 megabytes per second, 1 gigabyte per second, and 10 gigabytes per second. And we've been able to do that without actually increasing the cost. So it doesn't save you money, but it's a tremendous cost avoidance because now you have all this additional bandwidth without having to spend more money. The other thing that people have been able to get is increased reliability. If I can get more bandwidth for the same price, I can also get diversity of vendor, diversity of the physical connection. I can increase the survivability. I can go away from point-to-point circuits. Well, that's the other thing. I can go from point-to-point circuits to have two ways out to get to a very large, robust backbone. And what that buys you is increased survivability and elimination of single points of failure. And the third thing that you get by going to, that we've been able to realize by going to NWave, is increased cybersecurity. Because NWave is connected to our trusted internet connection access points. So it's the way that we efficiently get cyber protection for all of NOAA's internet traffic. It's the way that we get survivability of our trusted internet connection access points. So if we have a failure, not only can we fail over at the same location, so one of our locations is in the Washington metropolitan area, we have, as you'd expect, redundancy. If one stack of hardware fails, we can fail over in the Washington, D.C. area. But thanks to the NWave network, we can also fail over to one of the other 4 TICAP sites. So it improves the survivability of our security, and it improves our network security overall because unlike simply buying perhaps a commercial network operation, we have done a rigorous assessment and have a FISMA accreditation for our network operation centers, both the ones that the Weather Service operates for NWSnet and the network operation centers that are operated to support NWave. So that improves our confidence in network operations security. I'm not suggesting that a network provider doesn't have good security. I'm sure they do. What we have is the confidence of the level of security because we have visibility into it, having actually performed an accreditation, an assessment and authorization on the infrastructure, the people, the procedures that underlie our network operations center. So cost avoidance, resiliency, cybersecurity, what's not to like? We've been at this for quite some time. When we were doing research for this interview to make sure I understood, give you a good picture of what's going on, a lot of people thought, well, we're only first getting into the cloud now. And for infrastructure as a service, there's some truth in that. We've got a couple of infrastructure as a service contracts. We've got some applications there. We're using it in a hybrid way. One of our line offices is using the cloud as a backup to a government-hosted application. But we've actually been in the cloud for over 5 years because we were one of the earliest adopters of software as a service. And we use Google Apps for government. We were the second government agency to adopt. Actually, we may have been the second government agency to go to software as a service for email, calendaring, and collaboration. It happened to be Google. The first government agency was GSA, and our instance was larger than theirs. So we've been at it for a while. And security was the first concern we've had, and it's where we've learned the most lessons. So the great advantage of going software as a service, which we now do not only for email, calendar, and collaboration, but we also use software as a service to manage our mobile devices. We use software as a service to notify our employees when there's an emergency that they need to be aware of, building evacuation, don't show up for work because we've had a problem in a building. That's in the cloud. What we've done is we've taken the same structure that we use to assess and accredit systems that we operate and apply it to theirs. In the case of software as a service, which we've been at for quite some time, it's actually a pretty big challenge because we're only one of 1,000, one of 10,000 customers of this cloud. So how can we expect to get visibility into the details of what they do from a cyber perspective comparable to the visibility that we have in our own? Well, fortunately, in the past 5 years, the government has come out with a FedRAMP program whereby, on behalf of all government agencies, GSA, in the FedRAMP program, gets that visibility for us. So, whereas before I was having to negotiate with Google one-on-one, okay, I know you want to do government work, show me what you've shown GSA, have a conversation, I get access to their documentation. Actually, they were pretty open to that. That worked out really well. So Google's actually not a good example. It's everybody else who's coming into FedRAMP. Now GSA is doing that on behalf of the government. What we did with Google was, in tandem with GSA, it actually was exactly what FedRAMP is about. It was assess and accredit once, use many. So what would happen is you have an independent assessor, comes in, identifies all the controls that are in place, certifies a government entity, certifies, yep, that's exactly what they found, and this is the risks, these are the risks as we understand that. And then each individual authorizing official across the government makes their own accreditation decision based on their risk tolerance and their mission. So even though GSA accredited Google Apps for Government for their use before I accredited it for NOAA's use, because I'm the authorizing official, I couldn't simply accept their accreditation. We have a different mission. They provide critical services to government operations. We have high-impact systems that protect the lives and property of every person in this country. Not saying their mission is unimportant, but their dependency upon email is different from my dependency on email, NOAA's dependency. So in that light, I looked at what controls were in place and which controls were not in place, possibly differently than what GSA did. So when you see this difference, what do you do? And this is the critical lesson learned from the cyber perspective. Some people will say, okay, well, it's different, so I accept the risk. That's one option. But the other option is to decide that, no, I can't accept that risk. It's really important that that control be in place, so I'll put it in place on my nickel. And I'll augment the control stack that is provided by this cloud provider with something that I pay extra for and do internally. So if the cloud provider, for example, isn't encrypting data at rest or in transit, well, let's say at rest. Actually, Google does that now. But if they didn't, and that was important to me, I have the ability to encrypt it on our end and control the keys and do that. Some people would say, do that anyway, so you have 2 layers of encryption, like belt and suspenders. Fine. You decide the key to getting security right here is get that independent assessment, get the visibility into what the cloud provider is doing, and then don't stop. Decide what you need, and if you need more than is being provided, then add to it. If you can't add to it, and you can't accept the risks that you see from that assessment for whatever reason, then maybe you don't go with that provider. Under the FedRAMP program, they're making sure that the people who get into the program actually pass some really stringent minimum entry requirements. So it's highly unlikely that anybody, if the FedRAMP certification is at the right FISM impact level, something that your listeners or viewers could look up. If it's at that level, that shouldn't be a problem. you may want to add controls to it. So I doubt you'd ever have to walk away from a FedRAMP certified provider. But that program, plus doing the due diligence, don't just accept the accreditation. Look at, because that's somebody else's accreditation, look at the certification, the results of the assessment, make your own decision, fill in the gaps that you have. That's the key to getting security right. The other dilemma, as we move more and more into infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, where we have much more control over what's being hosted. So maybe all we're getting is bare iron, and we've got to put an operating system on, we have to put applications on. Or maybe we're getting an operating system, but we have to load all the applications, and if it's commercial off-the-shelf word processing, we have to buy the license. When you do that, the good news is that you have much more visibility over the day-to-day security. I didn't mention that, but in the infrastructure as a service, in software as a service, one of the challenges is to get day-to-day visibility over what's happening. If I run an application either on NOAA hardware or on hardware that's provided by a cloud provider, I can put agents on that hardware that monitor who's trying to attack it. And I can get audit logs from all of those things, and I can fuse all that information into my security operations center. Google does that for their own infrastructure. The challenge when you've got software as a service is getting that same data fed to you so you can get a whole picture. It's something we're still working on. When you go to infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, it's a lot easier to get that day-to-day picture, but it's also easier to be lulled into a false sense of security when you look at the controls themselves. So you look at this certification package, and you say, oh, look, they've got all these controls in place. I'm good to go. I'll just put my stuff out there. And what people forget, we haven't made this mistake, but I've heard about it. Trust me, we haven't done this. But what people forget is that those controls that you reviewed are only for the hardware and the data center. They don't attach to the applications. They're not going to patch that application that you loaded. That web server that you loaded onto that infrastructure as a service thing in the cloud, that's not being patched by the cloud provider. That's being patched by you, if you're not paying for it. So the trick and the pitfall in when you move wholesale applications to the cloud, and not just buy a service like with email, you actually move your applications to the cloud. The trick is to look closely at what they're doing. What's the scope of what they're protecting? And make sure that you're just filling the controls that are missing. You fill in, you're prepared to do all of the work, or basically keep on doing all the work that you've been doing when the entire responsibility was yours. Figure out exactly what they're picking up, and keep your eyes open, because there's some real pitfalls there. Another lesson learned is that, especially with infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, think hard about going to a hybrid where either you're using multiple cloud providers, or you're back for primary and backup, for backup processing, not backup data, but backup processing, or you keep backup processing yourself and put the primary in the cloud, or vice versa. And the reason for that is that if you run into a problem with the cloud provider, you want the ability to get to have like swing space, have a copy of the data processing while you make the contract shift. Something that people that we've learned over time is an important lesson learned. I've talked about the vision, and that vision is going to be enabled by procurements. But let me get some specifics. So we have a program called NOAA, which has a number of small business and 8A small business contractors who have been pre-qualified to do technical work for NOAA. So when we go out to them and we have a quick competition, we already know that they can get the work done, the turnaround's a lot faster. So shortly, in early fiscal year 17, we're going to be awarding a new small business element of the NOAA Link program. Sometime between FY17 and FY18, we're going to be doing the work to put in place around FY19 or 20 what we call NOAA Link 2.0, which is going to be probably by then a replacement of the contractors that we have. It may very well include non-small businesses, some unrestricted awards, and it will build on all the lessons learned that we've had over these years in the NOAA Link enterprise. Before we get there, we'll be using NOAA Link as visibility into the requirements and the goings-on of IT across NOAA to implement our requirements under FITARA. So we'll be using NOAA Link as a means to get visibility into the details of what's actually being done under contract. And also making sure that we maintain our arms around all the work that people want to do in IT. Some other big things that are happening. In the world of cyber, we're going to be awarding a large cyber integrated operations contract, which will pull together a number of different contracts that we have right now that we use to both conduct cyber operations and manage cyber defense operations and manage the infrastructure we use for that, but combine that with all of the infrastructure refresh and infrastructure modernization. Right now, those are separate activities, but we're thinking of bringing them together. So we're taking a hard look at whether we can do that. It'd be something we pull together in FY17, and maybe by FY18, have that on the street. In addition to a single award that consolidates a lot of cyber work that we do today through different contracts, we hope to possibly have an element where cyber as a service, which a lot of firms now offer, might be integrated into that requirement. So that's coming up in FY17. In fiscal year 18, the Comprehensive Large Array Storage System, which is the NOAA-wide large data set archive for stewardship, for data stewardship, that will probably be going into an operations and maintenance phase. It's now under development, but it should be going into operations and maintenance, and there'll be a new contract for that. We have contracts right now for high-performance computing in research and development, and we have separate contracts that we use to operate and modernize our supercomputers that we use for day-to-day operations, where we actually, on the R&D side, we develop, for example, the forecasting models, and on the operations side, every hour you get a new run of that forecasting model. So we have those two sets. They're under separate contracts today. They most likely will stay as separate contracts, so that's not clear. But what is clear is that between now and fiscal year 19, what NOAA will be developing is a unified strategy, so that whatever contracting we do on our research and development side and on the operations side will be with a single approach, as opposed to what do we want in the research community, what do we need in the operations community, and today those two communities talk, but we don't have a single strategy that governs the acquisition of both. It will also govern other things. It will govern how we manage those computers, how we deal with the requirements of those computers. But your question was about acquisition, so I'm focusing on that. But the unified strategy is much broader than that. In high-performance computing, our aim, just like the original vision I described earlier in this discussion, or this interview, is to decrease the cycle time, decrease the time from a good idea to become manifest as an application, in the idea of a unified strategy for high-performance computing, it's all about that. It's all about research to operations and back. Having operations inform research, doing it faster and better, because back to why I love this job, it's the way that you turn technology and all of the great science that NOAA's researchers and operational scientists do with a good dose of technology, mix it all together, get it right, and you can protect people's lives. And do it and advance it faster. That's what the unified strategy for high-performance computing is about. So we have that going on, and some of the other things that are going to be continuing are there'll be replacement contracts for the work that we do today at the desktop and other kinds of migrations. Those will probably be within the NOAA Link program as I see it today. And the other things that will be happening, class, I mentioned, that's an enterprise-wide service. There are also probably new ground systems that are going to be coming in the satellite and information service. They're looking at integrating their ground operations, which are very large computers that command and control satellites and produce products from the data that the satellite imagery and other information generate. Today, the satellite ground systems are tightly coupled with individual satellites and the applications, the products that come from the satellites. In the future, the idea is that there will be an integrated ground system, which is more efficient and more nimble. And the folks who are developing the architecture requirements for that in NOAA's Satellite and Information Service, they're working on that as we speak. And in the next few years, you should be seeing the results from that. So I've talked a lot about the big data project that we have. Big lesson learned there is that there is a tremendous opportunity by leveraging the marketplace to improve open government without necessarily dipping into the day-to-day, the money that you need to support day-to-day operations and to do your primary mission. Open government is important in democracy, and we wouldn't say that we won't fund that kind of transparency on our basic funding. We will. That's not the open government I'm talking about. I'm talking about moving from transparency and good democracy and good government to stimulating the growth of the American economy. And that secondary use, we believe, is something that is out there. It may not be the exact way that we do it today with a big data project. It's a research project. As the administrator of NOAA has said to me, we will only fail if we fail to learn. But my gut tells me that one way or another, there's a big opportunity to leverage the market power of government data, and this government will get it right. So that's an important lesson learned. The other lessons relate to cloud itself. We've talked about cyber. The big lesson learned there is first get visibility, but then look closely at what you're getting visibility of, and remember that just because you've got a contract for someone to do some controls, it's a responsibility that a CIO can never get rid of. You can trust, but you must verify. You've got to know what the deal is going forward. You've got to know what's your responsibility, because if something falls through the cracks, that becomes the weak link in the chain. And cyber is the single most important thing that any CIO does. It doesn't change when you go to the cloud. You shouldn't be afraid of it, because the power of the cloud is great. It allows you to get much more value for the taxpayer's dollar. It allows you to grow in your capability to reduce that cycle time that we were talking about without having to increase cost. The disadvantage early on that I was talking about with with software as a service, where you're one of 1,000, one of 10,000 users. So how can you possibly get visibility into their cyber posture? But but GSA and the FedRAMP program and we working with them have figured that out. Look at the benefit of being one of 10,000. When a cloud provider improves collaboration services, when they improve how they handle email, and they improve that user interface, how much more do taxpayers have to pay for that? Nothing. It comes because to stay in business, to compete, they've got to offer those additional enhancements to the 10,000, to the million users they have without charging them more. When their costs go down, those are cost avoidances that get passed on to the taxpayer and allow us to do more mission, improve our ability to protect life and property without raising the cost. So the benefits of going to the cloud are enormous. The power of the cloud mixed with open data offers real economic value. Got to watch the cyber thing, but don't let that paralyze you. If you don't take a risk, there's no reward. It's about balancing. These things aren't absolutes. Your responsibilities for cyber never go away, but you can meet them while going to the cloud. Another thing we learned that never goes away is, and this refers to something I said earlier, quality of the data. You put your data out there, it's got your name on it, you're always responsible for that. So just keep in mind what you're not giving away, and it'll all be good.